I am now.
Okay, so welcome to what we typically call these revisited or reactivated sessions. We're using the term reactivated, and that's because all the topics we're running for the second time, and this is the rerun of the Rich Media audio, and there's a Rich Media images that was last month, and then a Rich Media video, which is next month. Not sure. I'm seeing this meeting is being recorded prompt on the screen, Lillian. So
yeah, but it is. I do have a pause and stop recording button, so it definitely is. What I was interested in was whether people can see if they have a live transcript button at the bottom of their screens.
I can't see a live transcript at the bottom of my screen, but I haven't switched on anything.
No. It was, it was available to everyone, but it seems to have stopped being available, which is a pity because
I'm still seeing that continue button, Lillian. So you might want to click continue.
Where's the continue button?
There's a prompt saying this meeting is being recorded, and
I clicked my own one. I think that's for
that's
personal.
Everyone has to click their own one. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's such a pity with the live transcript. Like I say, I do apologize, but at the moment, I can't get it up and running. Shall I try stopping share and starting again to see if that makes a difference? I'm just going to try that. And I can turn on live transcript, enable auto transcription. There you go.
That's
now
coming on. Yeah, that's it.
Again. Apologies for that. It wasn't as smooth as I'd like it to be. But there you go. We're off.
Okay, that's next page. So just a very quick summary. You'll have access to this resource, but to summarize the reactive sessions, they're more flipped, more focused on activities, and more rooted in real experience with new additional guest speakers. And you can see some of the guest speakers on the screen, and you'll hear from those shortly. We also have an area where we created little journeys courses, and the right-hand part of the screen there refers to that, but there's a later page where it talks you through how to register and access those courses if you're so interested. Next page. And I think you usually do the analysis of what people said they most wanted to learn during their registration, Lillian, don't you?
Yeah, so when I looked at the kind of things, and thanks everyone for letting us know what you wanted to come to this webinar for, people were quite interested in best ways of making audio accessible, inclusive practice when using audio. People were interested in audio-based assignments, using audio for feedback, and in podcast assignments. Others wanted practical tips, about equipment, quality of recordings, best practice for effective audio. Someone asked a couple of people asked for remote teaching ideas. And that's something, if we have chance at the end to maybe look at other remote teaching ideas, but that's covered in our actual learning object as well. So some people were interested in the tools and technologies for audio, and I think Joe Dale has a exciting presentation about some tools that he uses a lot, and others just wanted some staff development ideas, how to get staff on board trying to use audio in their assignments. So there we go.
So what I want to quickly talk about is making sure that you don't miss out on all the other great stuff that's already in the learning object. The learning object link, if somebody can pop in if it isn't there already. Yeah, it's in there, but it's worth probably putting that in again. So we're kind of starting at the end of the learning object because of this being the second time through, but don't miss out on the fantastic resources that there are, the other 34 pages worth. And just to give you a quick example, I'll pick out one or two in particular. So Lillian, if you could pick on the pedagogical possibilities, let's pick on the pedagogical possibilities. There's a lovely bit of alliteration. So that's kind of a model that gives you an overview of everything, and you can click on those individual elements, feedback, and so on, reflection. So it's a really nice summary of lots of different ways of using audio. And if we close that light box now and look at the useful free resources. So this is just a little sampler of the things. So useful free resources that you might want to use, anything from clips of sound effects through to whole sort of background soundtracks that you can use. And then if we close that one and look at recording and editing, so I'm just picking out a few highlights. Lots of different tools that people use. We've also got a Padlet embedded in the resource with contributions from teachers, lecturers about what they use. And then the last one that I pick out is text to speech, which is kind of straddles between this and some of the other sessions that we've done on inclusion and so on. But very often the learners themselves just haven't taken on board that if audio is their preference, they could get text being audio. So we've got some ideas there about free tools for personal use, institutional options. If you click on that tab, Lillian, on that accordion a little bit lower, that's it. And then phones and tablets, not forgetting what you can do with phones and tablets. And then finally, I won't open this up, but there is the mind map there where there's lots of information on pulling together these different things. And if it's the research that you're interested in, we've got research and recommendations there as well. So lots of information. What we would love you to do after this session is to start to explore these three things, to look at any audio that you're using and commit to understanding how you can make audio more inclusive for all users. So what could you do in terms of your workflow so that you end up with a transcript? Or what tools could you use so, like we're doing at the moment, you can end up with a transcript of this session. It won't be 100% accurate, but it will be a darn sight better than nothing. Consider how you might use audio creatively with students. And what we'd really love, and we say this every month, please share your experiences on the Future Teacher discussion list. And I know people are busy and that doesn't always happen, but we do hear from time to time, we hear people say, that was an amazing session. I learned so much and I did this with my students and that with my students. And you sometimes wish, couldn't we have captured that and disseminated it to the community? So please do that if you get a chance.
Lots of nice banter going on in the chat as a result of all the things that you've brought up already, Alistair. So thank you very much for that. So without further ado, this series of webinars, we rather than going through the resources that we've built up before, we pretty much have guest speakers telling us their practice. So Barry and Chris from University of York, if you are ready, I am ready to move your slides on for you.
Thank you very much. So we're just going to say a bit about what we do and also a little bit about why we do it in the context of the philosophy degree. And just something to mention, given what you've just said before we kick off, we actually ran the second part of this module during lockdown with things online last year. And a lot of what we're talking about here seems to be replicable quite well online. So I think that's an encouraging aspect, but I'll let Barry start us off.
Okay, just to give a very quick overview of the module. In it, groups of students work together to produce a podcast which explores a contemporary issue of value. So that means either a question in ethics and morality, such as should there be a ban on military AI systems which choose their own targets, or a question in the arts. They might ask a general question about the arts, like what's the point of art? Okay, next. So this is quite a departure for philosophy. Typically, we ask students to complete assessments which are essentially writing an essay which is presenting one answer to a question and defending that answer. So the podcast task is different, not only in terms of being a recording of some spoken material, but also in terms of the task being really more about explanation and mapping the debate to allow a non-expert to understand it better and think it through for themselves. So Partly, we wanted to motivate students to think about that explanatory understanding side of philosophy, but there were other reasons for creating the module as well. And they were to do with the sorts of skills and abilities which we were or weren't developing so well with our other forms of assessment. So of course, we wanted to get students to have a bit more experience of working together to address complex and difficult intellectual tasks, which there's a certain amount of course, in seminars, but we felt we could do more to motivate with our assessment tasks. And we wanted, for citizenship reasons as much as for pedagogical philosophy reasons, to help people to explore contemporary issues carefully and to some extent dispassionately. We're always looking for ways to explain to students how they, and show to students how they can apply what they're doing in philosophy in terms of philosophical knowledge, but also in terms of philosophical skills. And this module allows them to apply philosophical knowledge and skills to real life problems and contentious issues. So we like that aspect of it, and I think they do too. And we also think that an important part of philosophy, and of course other arts and humanities and other academic disciplines, is that it can set people up with the skills to communicate complex and difficult ideas clearly in a way that's accessible to non-experts, because it allows students to pull out the essence of things. And this is a task that's well designed to encourage them to do that and to support them in doing that. Generally, of course, as well, for employability reasons and general life reasons, we also felt that it was important to give them a context in which students could negotiate challenges that arise from working together and negotiation in that context. So if we wanted to have a group work element, why choose a podcast in particular? Well, the podcast seemed like a natural format to use, given that the topics are topics where there is discussion and where there are different views to air. And as well, podcasts encourage an accessible presentation style. So that's really feeding into the skills of explaining things clearly. And we like the fact that having a recording rather than a live presentation allows students to hone and shape that presentation with perhaps a little bit less stress. There's also a creative aspect, of course, and that allows students to have input in ways that might not be having a speaking role, but are to do with thinking about contributing to discussions about what the best format to use for presenting the ideas in might be. And then it's much more practicable, we think, for fair and objective marking than a live presentation might be, in terms of making material accessible to third markers and external examiners and things. It's more obvious what the marking process has been.
Okay, in designing the module, we consulted carefully with a number of people around the university. We spoke to our own students in philosophy about what their concerns would be about doing such a kind of module. We spoke to students in departments already running group work modules who had experience of them. We spoke to York Careers and Placements, and we spoke to academic staff in York departments already running group work modules. Next. Here's some key points from those consultations. It became very clear that our own students had as their primary concern freeloading, that they'd end up in groups where some of the other members weren't pulling their weight and then would get, as they would think it, unfairly rewarded by receiving the group mark. We spoke to students who already had experience of group assessments. They also mentioned freeloading as a concern, and they very helpfully said that there were interesting and unhelpful differences between their experience of group work in paid employment and what tended to happen in university group work assignments, in that there was a lack of what you might call management oversight. Staff members weren't coming in to check up on how they were doing, how the group was getting along. Careers suggested emphasizing that the challenges that you face in group work are actually opportunities to gain experience and develop skills, all of which can be potentially related to prospective employers once you've completed your degree. And something that other departments gave us were some very useful models of peer evaluation. which helps to address the freeloading concern.
So what have we ended up with? Well, students work in groups of between 3 and 5, and they research their topic, and they research in particular the philosophical issues which arise from that topic. And in the first instance, they're asked to identify their preferred topic area. So currently we offer areas as follows: technology and responsibility, freedom of conscience, nationhood and morality, freedom of speech, and the arts. And we've tried to give quite a constrained list of topics to choose from so as to make grouping people together into their preferred topics possible, rather than having too diffuse a range of things people want to work on. So groups are created on the basis of topic choice, and we ask students to nominate a first choice, and in practice only really a second choice. We ask for a third if necessary. So once formed, groups decide as their first task on a specific question within their topic area to pursue. And of course, the module coordinators facilitate those discussions with an eye to where the philosophical issues which arise might be. And the presentations are supposed to be designed to explain and explore the topic rather than to reach a conclusion about what the correct thing to say about that topic is. Students decide later on in the module on the details of the presentation in terms of which formats would be most appropriate to use: two headers, guest interviews, vox pops, people taking on the role of an expert on a particular kind of view, for example, and trainings provided by Wayne and some of his very helpful colleagues on the use of Audacity and the editing software which we use. I should say that the recording stage last time round was done over Zoom because we were all online, and that seemed to work out quite well as well. So the module runs in the second half of year 2 in spring and summer, and it's currently optional, but it will become compulsory in coming years.
Okay, so we'll now talk about a number of ways that we supported group working on the module, and in particular how we addressed these concerns about freeloading. So the first element there were regular timetabled group meetings. So there's a single 2-hour timetable session for all of the groups in most weeks of the module run. In those sessions, groups consider what members have prepared since the last meeting, and they work together to develop their understanding and ideas. And we as module conveners oversee those meetings, and we drop in on the groups to discuss ideas and talk to them about their progress.
Each group is required to complete a work log, and originally that was intended to just be a Google Doc which was shared amongst the group members and also shared with the conveners. That's grown into a richer resource for most groups, which they use for keeping track of all sorts of aspects of their discussion. The work logs are compulsory part of the final submission, in that there's a mark deduction if it's not submitted, but the work log isn't marked in its own right.
Okay, third element of supporting group working, peer evaluation. At the end of the module, students have an opportunity to return confidential numerical feedback on the team members' performance during the module. Currently, we ask them to address 3 factors: contribution to content, contribution to team working, and contribution to meeting deadlines, both the formal deadlines that we set and deadlines that the group sets for submission of development work. Those scores get fed into an algorithm which returns a suggested, that is merely advisory, individual adjustment to the group mark for individual marks for the podcast. And that algorithm is designed so that if all of the members in a group, for instance, mark each other up, then they all end up with just the original group mark for the assessment. Okay, here's some feedback. The module has been well received. It is worth saying that the people who were on this module were self-selecting in this first run with this feedback, so you'd expect reasonable scores, but it's also worth saying that these scores are very high in the range for what we usually expect from philosophy modules. You might be a little bemused by the idea that there's a lecture score here. Chris and I give little presentations during the module on particular aspects, like how you would structure a podcast, where a podcast should be pitched in terms of prose style and presentation style. So that's the score for those. I think it's particularly worth noting the intellectual stimulation score of 4.9. One thing that students really enjoyed out of this module was the independence that they had and the fact that they were developing their own ideas, selecting and selecting their own topic.
Thank you very much. Questions welcome.
Thank you very much, Barry and Chris. What we normally do is save a lot of the questions for the end, but if people have any burning questions, please feel free to add them into the chat, and Barry and Chris will answer them in there, or save them for the open mic towards the end. So thank you very much for that. It's very, very interesting how you got over the biggest hurdles in group working generally. And that the fact that you did the research before you actually plunged, if you like, into a group work assignment. So I just wanted to mention that on the next page of the learning object, you will have the option to have some more free resources. We already have quite a lot of good resources in the learning object that we mentioned earlier, that Alistair pointed out about making audio and editing audio. But Wayne, who is in the participants today, he created a lot of these handouts and files for the students to practice with. So if you're interested, just have a play of the audio on this page, because it clearly conveys the difference in microphone quality. So you might be quite keen to make sure that students are aware of that as well. And Wayne has shared the handouts that he has used with his students. They're like self-learning resources. So thanks very much, Wayne. And right, next up, we have Joe, and I'm going to stop sharing so that he can actually share his screen.
Lillian, wasn't Joe asking to go last?
No, I think he's fine to do it.
Oh, well, that's fine.
I'm fine. I'm fine
Okay.
now. Thank you.
Perfect.
I'll just share my screen. There we are. Lovely. And present. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you ever so much for this opportunity. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, if that's okay. Those people who haven't seen me before, I'm a former languages teacher working at secondary school level for 3 years and then 10 years at middle school level. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been an independent languages consultant. And today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics of audio, educational podcasting and audio, and in particular, the use of feedback using Quicker Conversations and Moat. And both the tools I'll be showing are completely free. And I hope that you find this interesting. My contact details are there as well on the screen, at Joe Dale on Twitter, and joedale@talk21.com is my email address. Okay, so it'd be interesting to know in the chat if anyone's heard of Quicker. Quicker is a free tool which was designed by a physics teacher in the southwest of England quite recently. And it allows two main functions. One function is creating audio QR codes for individual QR codes. So you can assign a piece of audio to a QR code, but you can also use it for a threaded conversation, which I think is very exciting. So that's called Quicker Conversations. And what you do is, it's actually explained in this video tutorial here that I've created using Loom. But essentially what it allows you to do is you have to create an account as a teacher. You record your audio as the first submission, and then you share the link. It could be in the chat, for example, in a remote teaching context. You share the link with your participants. They can then all record individual bits of audio and send them to the link. And so the thread gets longer and longer and longer, which is really cool. You can moderate the audio submissions as well. And you can also lock the conversation as well. As you can see, the padlock on the right-hand side at the bottom there, and the approve and delete option. So it's a really, really nice way of being able to practice speaking and feedback in a conversation form, or maybe a presentation with some audio feedback or some instructions that can be used in breakout rooms or as general asynchronous practice. I think is a really great idea to have a look at, and it's completely free. If you want to keep the audio for longer than 3 months, you can pay like £1.50 a month to do that. But you can always right-click any of the players and click Save Audio As and download the audio as a WAV file if you want to keep it forever. It's a little bit like Voiced, not exactly. It's different to Voiced. That said, you can add a photo, text, and a link as well.
as part of your conversation thread if you want to. So you could have like a picture prompt for instructions or text or what have you. But I wouldn't say it's exactly like VoiceThread in that way. But with VoiceThread, if you want to make your VoiceThreads private, then you have to pay. Whereas this is private in the sense of whoever has the URL would be able to add to it. But then, as I said, you can turn on moderation and what have you. Let me carry on. I will try and answer the questions as well as they come up. Here are some screenshots of different tweets from different language teachers at secondary school level using both versions of Quicker. So you can see in the top one, Karine is talking about using Quicker Feedback to record her voice on a QR code. So that would be an individual QR code. Making a gap fill text on pages by speaking to her iPad and then blanking out the words with her Apple Pencil. By doing that, her students were able to practice listening, grammar and thinking skills all in one go. Invocad MFL, which is Sarah Bell up in Scotland, saying having explored different ways of giving feedback when people submit photos of work, no tablet or magic pen. Before I pasted into Word, then commented, then today I remember Quicker Feedback and I can live mark and send a unique link to each pupil. Turnbull Model Languages are suggesting if you're allowed to do this sort of thing in the classroom, if you are in a face-to-face context, you could do dictation and translation races, which is really nice, I think. I'm not sure how COVID safe that is, but anyway. Bottom left there, you've got Claire Wilson saying, enjoyed using Quicker for a speaking homework. Nice to hear some students speaking German given the current limitations in the classroom. Miss Burke saying, I love being able to continue doing speaking practice thanks to Quicker Feedback. I particularly like the emphatic hola señorita at the start of each recording. And then Vincent Everett, who's the head of languages in Suffolk, saying, I've used it with Norfolk, should I say. I've used it with Year 12 Spanish for voice-to-voice dictation. They listen and repeat it back a bit longer each time until they can do the whole text or summarize it or answer a question. Simple, spontaneous responses, not a presentation, just like in the classroom, which I just think is really nice on its own. Okay, let's carry on. Here's some other ideas. Miss Smith, who's an art teacher, decided to put together these praise postcards. As you can see, she's got the graphic there, which I presume was made using Canva. That's certainly very popular amongst teachers. So the idea is that the teacher would record some audio feedback, put it on the card, and then send it home. That inspired Miss Harkins, who seems to work in the same school, who is an English teacher using the same idea. That then inspired Anna Brunner, who's a languages teacher, who then, I've got a little screenshot there of a little video of her example praise postcards. And the one above Anna is John Waith, who works in Spain as a languages teacher. And he shared this image on Twitter recently. And okay, does that mean I've got to stop now? Or does that mean
no, that's the halfway mark.
Halfway mark. Phew, that's good. Okay, phew.
5 minutes left.
Okay, all good. Right. And then Mark, the developer of Quicker, was inspired by teachers using Quicker in this way, which he hadn't thought of. And then he designed a template to create your own praise postcards really, really easily by using the upload option there. So there we are. That's perfect, because that is halfway through. Phew. Right. Moat. I'd be interested to know if you've heard of Moat. Again, Moat hasn't been around that long. It's a Chrome extension, and it allows for audio feedback in Google Docs, Slides, and Classroom. As you can see on the left-hand side there, essentially you've got the commenting box in Google Docs. When you have the extension installed, the little button appears. You click on that for free. You can record up to 30 seconds per Moat, and you can do as many as you want to. If you want to pay, I think £19 a month, then you can have £19 for the year, should I say? You can have up to 90 seconds, and if you pay, I think £50 or £60 for the year, you can have multilingual transcription. An example of which is on the right-hand side. With the extension, if you click on the top of the extension, you can use what's called the Moat pad, which means that you can record audio and it copies the link automatically to your clipboard, which means you can post it wherever you want, into a Zoom chat or a Teams chat or wherever. And you've also got the new Moat to Slides option, which allows you to record audio directly into Google Slides, which is a lot simpler than the previous way of doing that, using the standard way in Google, uploading to Google Drive and then inserting it into Docs, into Slides from there. This is a video clip from Peter Horner, just going through some of the ways in which you can use Moat for commenting in Docs, Slides, and Sheets, etc. This is the YouTube channel for Moat, again, going through all the different ways you can use the different options. Moat book is when you can have like a bank of audio files that you can then add. If you want to add the same audio file to different comments, then you can do that as well using the Moat book. That's a premium feature. This is the Moat to slides. So that allows you to now to record directly into slides. This is a presentation by Sam Carey, K-A-R-Y, who has a fantastic YouTube channel called The New EdTech Classroom. He's based in the States. And this is, an animated GIF, which Jake Miller produced recently, who does a fantastic podcast called the Anyway, it's got the word duct in it. I'll remember it in a minute. The Ed Duct Tape podcast, I think it is. And he gave me permission to use this GIF. As you can see there, you're clicking on the little Moat circle. It'll start in a second. You then record your audio. Right, so you click on the circle at the top there on the left. There we are, to the left. Yeah, to there. Click on the circle. You then record your Moat. 30 seconds for free, 90 seconds if you pay. It then allows you to play it back. You then click the insert option. It will then appear on the slide, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You can also right click the loudspeaker icon and choose the replace image option and replace it for any image that you want, which is quite a nice idea as well. And this is just a short thread from Joe Ganade about different ways you can use Moat in the classroom, which I thought you'd find interesting. This is Darren White, who shows how to make a forced copy of a Google Slides presentation where the voice comments are embedded. In other words, each student could get their own copy with the instructions as audio instructions, which I thought was a very cool idea. And just I thought, hopefully you found this interesting. And if you be interested to know more about what I do, here's 18 example sessions on teaching languages remotely, which could be applied to across the curriculum as well. And you've got the link at the bottom there. And I'm just going to share the final URL for you to have the whole thing as well. So is.gd/future teacher. And again, thank you so much for the invite from Lillian to come along to this session today, because audio is one of my absolute passions. So thank you ever so much. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Oh, and just so people know, Ron's going to share screen next, but I've been after Joe Dale to join us in our webinars for like 3 years, I think. So I'm so pleased that you could join us today,
Thank
Joe.
you.
Big fan of your work.
Thank you.
We used to see each other in conferences, but obviously we don't do that anymore.
Absolutely.
Because of COVID. But so next up we have Al Holloway from Northampton University, who has found it quite useful to be able to talk to staff about how they're using audio in their feedback to students. So Joe, feel free to answer questions in the chat. We'll pass over to Al.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to share with you today. So I'm just going to talk talk to you about the examples of Emmeline, who works in fashion, and Mark Allenby, who's a lecturer in social work, who's on the chat today in the session. So I better make sure I don't misrepresent anything. So Emmeline has been doing audio feedback, I think, for the last 3 years. I spoke to her recently, and she said that she'd started it way back, and so students had got through their whole degree with getting the audio feedback. She was using an app on the iPhone, which is called Voice Record Pro, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a free app, and I use it a lot for recording my my poems that I write when I'm struck with inspiration. So as it says on the little bullet points, she would see their formative work, and I think originally she would give them verbal feedback, and then I remember she said that some students didn't consider that to be proper feedback, so that was one of the things that prompted her to record it so that they could listen back on it. So she'd listen to their submission, she'd record feedback on the iPhone. There's a mechanism, a setting on the app that allows you to set up a kind of a server, a temporary server, so you can download the MP3 files directly from the iPhone onto the laptop, which can sometimes be a bit of a faff. And then she'd go into the Grade Center in our Blackboard installation and then attach it to the students' feedback. She said that she also gave them some written feedback, and I think in some instances she might have used a rubric, but I think she thought it was important to summarize some of the key takeaways in written form. And Mark had a different approach. He used Turn It In, which allows you to record 3-minute audio feedback clips. And if you're interested in the way that he's done it, then obviously he can talk about it more eloquently than I can. The feedback then, yes, I think both of them seemed to convey that it was kind of richer. Particularly, let's talk about Emmeline. She said that sometimes in the audio feedback, she could be a little bit richer in tone. She could be a little bit kinder. She found that sometimes she could get more packed into the audio than she could do if she was given written feedback. She had to be aware of her tone a little bit, so that not to record stuff if she was in an angry mood. Maybe Mark had spoken about that as well. She said that it was important because obviously they could review it, they could go back to it, that for some students, if they were just listening to the verbal feedback, they might just focus on the one negative thing and completely ignore the good stuff that she'd put in there. So that was useful to the students. She had said it was much more detailed than written, and I shared a view that I've been using speech to text recently because I broke my shoulder a while back, and when I was doing emails I couldn't use my hands, and I found that, you know, using my voice to do emails or to kind of give feedback, I could be a little bit more verbose than I might have done on an email. So she definitely conveyed that feeling that she could, yeah, she could put a lot more into the audio than she would have done if she was writing it, and also give it a nicer tone. And also that final point then, that it was accessible. Now the thing that we I've got my personal little timer there, so I'm halfway through. I'm pretty much done there.
It beat me to it, Al.
I know. I'd always, because I'm a waffler, you see. The accessibility, yes. The thing that we didn't talk about with Emmeline or with Mark is that if students wanted the audio in a different format, how they would do that, and I might go back to it with some thoughts, because obviously we've got access to Word, Office 365, so I know that you can upload your audio and it can produce a transcription. So I'm quite keen, because I've got an accessibility remit at Northampton, so I'm kind of keen to try and support that stuff. Yeah, Mark was making a comment about Blackboard Ally that we use, which does the opposite, which turns written feedback in some instances if you want it into audio. Okay, well listen, that's about all I wanted to share. Those two stories, it was very generous of them to share what they'd been up to, and we were sort of remarking to each other and also to Lillian that we sometimes publicize what we do out to an external audience, but we don't often succeed in sharing it internally. And one of the things that the university wants to do, particularly at the moment because everyone's remote, is find a way to share work. So I'm going to take this learning object and share it with colleagues, because there may be other people that are doing audio that we're not aware of. But I think I would take a punt and say it's not the norm at the university. And I think my final point was in relation to both of them. This was formative work, not summative, but I don't think this feedback form is necessarily, it doesn't exclude summative assessment. Okay, lovely people. It's wonderful. It's always a bit odd just talking into the ether, assuming people are listening to you.
We are here. We are listening.
Good. Good. Okay, so that's me. Thank you. If you've got any comments, that's brilliant. I can obviously share my email if you want to ask anything, and I can put you in touch with the brilliant colleagues who actually did the work rather than me that just, you know, tailgates on their effort.
That'd be great. If you want to pop your email in there, that'd be great. If people want to follow that up.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Al, and also Barry, Chris, Joe. Wow, what how much we've covered in. Alistair will be clearer on exactly how many minutes that is that we've covered in the last few.
32 minutes.
We have an open mic session next, so our presenters could switch their webcams back on and their mics back on. But also before we do that, a couple of, or maybe more than a couple of happy birthdays we need to say to who did we establish? There's
Alex Reed and Chris J, and they both happen to be from the University of York. What a coincidence.
Well, we've got 56 people in the room, so maybe there are more birthdays that people want to
yeah, let us know in the chat if it's your birthday as well.
So I think I'm still sharing my screen, and what we usually do here, as long as we haven't overrun on time, and I think we're good today for a change, is just to pick up on some of the text chat questions and for our presenters to answer some of them verbally, which, one of the benefits of audio is that you can have all that richer interaction that audio provides versus quickly typing a response in the text chat. And anyone else that might want to, we obviously can't have 56 people talking at the same time, but if you would want to pose a question or speak via mic, then put your hand up using the icons or indicate in the text chat, and we can enable that as well. So were there any questions you want to respond to via audio, any of our presenters, or Alistair, Lillian?
I think Alistair was having a conversation with Chris and Barry a little bit about inclusive practice and accessibility. So did you want to summarize that, Alistair?
Yes, we had a long conversation about this. Myself, Ron and Lillian had a long conversation when we were preparing this, because it's really nuanced. I think the point came through very clearly in what Al was saying, for example, about how that audio can add, for many students, it can add richness, add kindness, add tone, add all sorts of things. So for many students, use of audio is fantastic compared to what the alternative might be: writing an essay, reading a book. However, of course, there are students for whom that's not going to work. So I'm just interested in in really the experience of our presenters in what they would do if they find themselves with a deaf student or a student with communication difficulties. And this isn't in any way to undermine the fantastic quality of what they're doing, but it's just to work out how can you ensure that by knocking down some barriers, you don't create an additional barrier.
Chris, shall I speak to this?
Yeah, no, great.
Okay, so one of the things we were keen about actually in designing a podcast module, as opposed to, say, a module which had a live presentation as its summative assessment, was that students could take on a number of different roles. And we highlight this to groups right at the start of the module. And there's a lot of work that goes into the podcast, which doesn't necessarily involve speaking on that finished podcast. So there's a lot of script development. There's a huge amount of research and discussion. And a lot of that is text-based. One of the things we found that I think Chris mentioned was the work logs, which were originally meant only to be a minimal record of, the basic details of what had been done in the meetings and outside meetings, actually developed into quite rich resources and work pads for the groups. And that was all text-based. So in the case of students with hearing difficulties, there would be lots of room for them to contribute to their group work. And in addition, we would support students with hearing difficulties who wanted to get involved in the final spoken presentation. And we also insist on either a script or a transcript as part of the final submission. And I think this year we'll be asking them to use live transcript in Zoom to produce transcripts of their broadcasts as well, so that the broadcasts will actually be accessible to those with hearing difficulties.
What's really interesting about the point you make there is the way in which there's actually two very different types of inclusiveness. There's the technical inclusiveness of the format, that for some people is very technically inclusive, for others less inclusive. But there's also that balancing act, because you're using pedagogical approaches and techniques to actually circumvent the limitations of the format for a deaf person, because the way you're setting it up, they still have room to contribute in all sorts of other ways. And I think that's a really powerful thing for people to take away, that, you know, inclusion is not just about, is this totally accessible to everybody as a resource or an activity? It's also, well, actually, what's the pedagogy behind it? Because it may be that the pedagogy makes an inaccessible resource perfectly accessible because of the process. So thank you.
I noticed Lillian is responding regarding the Zoom options for the captions, and we haven't covered, and for those not familiar with the way this works in Zoom, is you should be seeing a live transcript button in the bottom of your Zoom interface, and you can select the options there to have the transcript also appear in the text chat. So this is you can personalize how the text chat works for you, including changing the size of it and so on. So it's powerful stuff, but it is behind the scenes. It's Otter AI that's working with that, which is not free and you do have to pay for.
And what is nice is that whilst the subtitles that you see, the captions on the screen, don't indicate who's speaking, the transcript does indicate who's speaking, and that is also very powerful.
Well, that's great. And Hazel's been telling us that she does use audio podcasting, I think, Hazel, for summative assignments as well.
Sorry, Lillian. It's actually within Turnitin. We're using it in the summative assignments. So as we use the Grade Centre, we're recording our Turnitin feedback for the students to help them. Their formative feedback we do through oral anyway, and we use the Otter AI on our Zoom sessions, but it's as the live transcript on the side of the recording that the students then can download alongside the recording, because we have a lot of international students and their access to the platform can sometimes need to be different because of requirements within their own country of origin. It's not always possible for them to access Zoom in quite the same way as others can.
That's a very valid point as well. Obviously, when we talk about accessibility and inclusive practice, it's not just hearing impaired students who find captions helpful. There are lots of other users who find having captions helpful, or, as you say, being able to consult the transcript afterwards. That's pretty powerful as well.
I think just doing my teachery bit here, I think I probably need to
move us along.
Move Ron, and I think it's Ron doing the final bits.
Well, I think we can keep the discussion going, but what I will do is you'll see that we're on page 39 of our resource at the moment, and there are 44. So I'll whiz through those and keep the text chat and so on happening. So the page I'm showing now, hopefully everyone's still seeing my screen, is just a summary of the journeys that we created over all the topics of the initial 3 years of the project. And they're little mini courses, so journeys read courses. And this is a step-by-step guide on how you can register and access those. If anyone wants to kind of look at those topics and explore some of the activities that we've added to those topics that aren't possible within the hour of a webinar and so on. So there's quite a rich resource there. If anyone is struggling for human resource and wants to enlist additional support, there's our contact details there, and certainly myself and Alistair are kind of working with all sorts of organisations, and Lillian too. There's a next steps page where we're really keen. You've seen how really great it is to hear from all sorts of people across the sector, our guest speakers each time. And what we've tried to do is have new guest speakers so that they add to the previous guest speakers, and the recordings available from the first delivery of each of the topics. So if you're interested in presenting, doing a guest slot on working with rich media video, which there's a lot of overlap with the audio as well, but additional things to pick out. So that is on Thursday, 25th of February, and we'd be keen to hear from you. And there's the contact button there, or the email address. Also a prompt to join our our mailing list if you haven't already. We ask you before you sign out to do one thing. We'll come back to that activity. And then the last thing is that this resource and all of our resources is created with a tool called Xerti, which has lots of affordances for including audio and being accessible and so on. Interested to hear from Al whether you're using Xerti, because I know I look after the Northampton Xerti installation, and be interested in whether you're exploiting the audio functionality of Xerti there. But this isn't a session about Xerti, it's just that we use it to make these resources available, and you'll also find links where you can download and repurpose many of the resources as well. So including earlier on, I don't think we referred to it, there's a kind of built-in audio recorder that you can just use in the browser, record, and then download the audio file. So anyone that hasn't got the kind of tools can possibly try that just to record audio. So we usually finish with this one thing, and for some people it works. So you won't be able to do this on my shared screen. You need to open the resource in your own browser window, and I'll put the link in the text chat direct to this page. But if it doesn't work for you, then just put your thoughts in the text chat. And so the kind of prompt is, what one thing will you do as a result of this session? And given all the resources and tools that people have said they've not seen before and not heard of before, there must be a whole list of things that people are going to go away and explore. So be as specific as you can with those thoughts and reflections, or any other thoughts you have on what you've heard and seen today. Anything to add, Lily and Alistair, in terms of what we haven't covered yet?
I think the one thing I would love to kind of have a little bit of discussion for those that can hang around for a little bit is on the technology side and the practice. I know sometimes the audio quality can vary enormously, and that's sometimes it's technical, but I know Ron's got stories about his days that he might tell us in a moment. But you know, how do you encourage staff to not just get into audio, but do it well? Because if it isn't done well, then it can actually be a lot less accessible than you thought it was going to be. So any practices that people, sorry, I'm just trying to find the bin here. A bit of my tomato plant's fallen off. I still have a tomato plant from last year flowering in my office.
I may have missed it, but one of the things I remember used to hear, probably a lot more in the past than I do now, but people kind of saying they don't include audio in their resources because they don't like the sound of their voice. And yet, you know, they're obviously talking to the very same students when they're delivering face-to-face.
Yeah.
And I've never quite understood what that difference is, because actually recording, you got time to re-record it and say it even better, with better intonation and so on. So but maybe some of that is the technical challenge of recording and including audio rather than the embarrassment of doing so.
Go on, I was interrupted, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I have watched colleagues send in requests to improve the quality of their recordings. And when I watch the lecture recording, I can see that their headset isn't around their heads, but it's on the table. And when they have good audio, it's when the headset's actually close to their mouths. And it's quite easy to forget for those of us who end up having to spend a long time in the day with our headsets on, then we take them off and we put them on, that you start a recording and you can forget to just put it on. It's as simple as that. So one is providing people with the headsets, and two is people remembering to put it back on when they're starting a recording. Over to you, Al.
I was going to make three little points. One was I often switch off my video so that I'm focusing on my voice. And I've in the past I've done bits of video work and little bits for radio, but I kind of know that if you're looking at yourself, you're conscious of other things. Whereas if you've just got the audio, you can focus on it a little bit more. There are some apps that also allow you to monitor the sound of your voice, and I think sometimes that's helpful, because if you can hear back what your audience is listening to, that can help you modify your voice in the moment. I don't have any particular techniques for that. And the last thing I was going to add was I had a little go the other day of recording my voice. When we use Kaltura, but then also recording, like I'd pull up haunted house ambience or forest ambience, and I'd have that playing, and that sort of made me feel like I was on the beach. And I apologized that the seagulls were nicking my chips, but it affected the quality of my voice. So I guess my takeaway is sometimes switch off all bits of video and just focus on the voice. And I think that's what a lot of staff don't do, because a lot of our staff have been driven, I guess, necessarily to see my face, and they don't always appreciate that sometimes, as lovely as your face is, it actually gets in the way of your lovely voice. Thank you.
Interesting point there, because you would almost give slightly different advice, and this ties in with our next session on video next month. But if you were doing a vodcast, for example, it would be very important your face was looking at the screen, people could see your lips. That would be really helpful for supported hearing. But of course, you're absolutely right that for something that's purely audio, it's very often best to be looking completely away, doing something completely different. So a balancing act there, depending on what your final output's going to be.
Absolutely.
I need to perhaps apologize. I sent individual messages in the text chat to each of our presenters when it wasn't their presentation slot, suggesting they might want to turn off their webcam if they wished. That wasn't because I wanted you to turn your webcam off, but that itself can be quite a distraction, can't it? Because you've got someone else presenting, and then you're sitting there kind of listening, and it can be quite a distraction both for the subject of the presentation and so on. So that was the only reason I made those suggestions, not necessarily.
I had to be very aware of my active listening until Alice, one of you, told me to switch off my webcam, because I was having to go whereas switch off the video and I can just carry on looking out the window.
It's also a problem for some of us if we're using, I've got 3 screens, I don't know how many, and so you kind of often looking at the text chat on a different screen, it looks like you're not paying attention. So that can be another reason to do that, I think.
There's going to be a bit of screen envy going on here, and there may even be some face hair envy as well from the chat.
Absolutely. So so what one thing, that's a lovely list of actions that people are inspired to try out as a result of this webinar. Thank you very much. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. Feel free to encourage them to attend the next Future Teacher webinar, and feel free to encourage your colleagues to present, because I think all our speakers will agree, and anyone who's presented at the Future Teacher webinars before, it is a way of CPD, professional development, and interacting with other people on your experience. It's just a really good way to kind of reflect and think through your practice. So I'm going to stop the recording at this point.